Thank you so much, Ibis. I'm really thrilled to be here, and I'm really excited to see all of you here as well. It's so great. I love seeing everybody sharing their new jobs. It's such a beast of a process, the job market, and so it's really lovely to see everybody here and sharing their successes because so often we're mired in rejection, and so it's great to see everybody here. And for those of you that are still on the market or maybe didn't have the best first year on the market or have to be on again, you just got to keep going. So I'm really happy to see so many of you here and really appreciate it. I'm just going to give you a little overview of me and my career. Some of you may have heard of me or read my work, which is still sort of boggles my mind even after like 20 years that people are reading things that I've written and see value in that. So that's pretty special to me. So I as Ivis and I were just chatting, I got my PhD in 2009 from the University of Texas at Austin, where I focused on housing policy, wrote my dissertation on NIMBYism, which is now apparently a very a robust subject. We've got NIMBYs, we've got YIMBYs, and ne'er the twain shall meet, and there's all sorts of ideological differences there. It's exciting to sort of have written about that ages ago, and and now it's something that people are talking about all the time. So my first job was a non-tenure track position right after I graduated. I had several interviews for tenure track positions and I was a finalist for a couple of postdocs, but I ended up only getting one offer, and it was a non-tenure track position at Appalachian State University in Boone, North Carolina, which for me, I'm from Massachusetts originally, and then was in Austin for 5 years, real city girl. It was a real culture shock going to a small town in the mountains of North Carolina and being at Appalachian State. I actually stayed there for 5 years. I was converted to a tenure track position. For those of you who are in non-tenure track positions and are looking to convert, this seldom happens. This was something that it's very rare. It just ended up randomly that my department happened to get a line at the same time that I was in a non-tenure track position, and they decided to convert me instead of doing a whole search. But after a few years, the small town sort of became a little too small for me, and I wanted to move somewhere bigger. And I moved to Cleveland State University in 2014 as a tenure track assistant professor, and I got tenure there in 2018. Um, I left academia in 2024 for reasons. I burned out pretty hard, and so that's one of the reasons that as I kind of thought about what I wanted to do next, I decided that my experience in academia was something that I could bring to other people and have help others navigate this career without burning out because it's pretty intense, and so now what I do is I work with junior faculty and all faculty actually to help them figure out how to get work-life balance and how to be really successful without killing yourself or losing your voice, and really being able to maintain who you are as a scholar and who you are as a faculty member in this within higher education. So, oh, and I also have I have a new book out in case anybody cares, called "Not Welcome Here: Racism and Property in America." It's coming out next week through Routledge, and I would, if you like, you can have your library order a copy, and that would be great. So, what I really want to talk about today is the sort of overwhelm that occurs when you have a new faculty position. And it doesn't matter whether you're on a tenure track or a postdoc or a lecturer or anything like that. There's a lot of things that are the same across these different um, types of positions. And it's a lot. You've gone from being a student really and finding your own voice as an independent scholar, which is really what the PhD is all about. And then all of a sudden, you're moving across the country into a new place where you don't know anybody. And, you sort of lose this structure of support that you had in the PhD program, your mentors as well as your peers. A lot of your peers might also be scattered to new jobs, and everybody all of a sudden has a whole new set of priorities, and so do you. And so it's a really tough time. Moving in general is incredibly stressful, and then all of a sudden you're in a new type of position, where you're all of a sudden you've gone from being a student to being an expert, and you're like, oh, I'm a professor now. How did that happen? And what am I supposed to do with this information? And so the time of imposter syndrome, is now. So and everybody feels this way. You feel like you have to show up at your first day, in your lecture, and you're like, I am the expert. I have all of the answers. And you think you actually do have to have all of the answers, in that first semester. It's incredibly terrifying, frankly. And that's coming from somebody who is really, really comfortable speaking in front of a crowd. I mean, I'm an extrovert. I always have been. I've always been like this. And so, but so even for the folks who seem naturals or seem comfortable in these scenarios, we're all terrified, all of us, every single one of us. So, you're starting this new job where you're supposed to be the expert. And, not only that, you've got to go through just normal life stuff, like finding a dentist, and like finding a new hairdresser and like navigating this new town or new city that you're in. And then maybe you have a partner, who's also trying to find a job. And then you've got to, deal with negotiating those processes. And so it's a lot. And so for me, I wanted to sort of come here and talk about just a few key things that can help you navigate the job part of it, with a little more ease. And so I wanted to start by talking about your contract. Now, this might seem obvious, but you really need to read your contract. And so what this will look like is, you'll have an offer letter usually, which outlines um, the key elements of your contract, your salary, what your teaching load is going to be, what your research expectations are, whether you have any startup funds, what your summer salary might look like, whether you have access to summer salary funds or not, whether you're expected to teach during the summer or not. All of these things are in your contract. Sometimes you'll need to elect, if you're on like a 9 or 10 month contract, you'll want to elect to receive your salary over the 12-month period, or else you might come up with a terrible surprise in June when you're not getting paid. So make sure y'all do that. So look at your faculty contract. Make sure you understand what those expectations are, and make sure that they are in line with what you were told, or what you talked to your dean or your chair about when you were accepting the job. Just, double check all of this stuff as you're starting your first semester. Make sure that all of your ducks are in a row, that everybody is on the same page regarding what your work expectations are, especially you. If you are lucky enough to be in a union school, make sure you look at your union guidelines. Know who your union representatives are. Understand, try to pay attention if you're if the union is doing in a negotiation year and negotiating the contract. So you want to understand not only what you personally have been told as your dean, but also what faculty at the university, what their expectations are, and whether those expectations will change as new contracts are coming together every few years. So you want to make sure that you're looking at not only what your responsibilities are, but what your rights are. And so that's an incredibly important part of this is understanding what your contract is. And if you don't understand things in your contract, this is why if you have a union representative, you want to make sure to ask them those questions. If you don't, then these are things that you can talk to your chair about if you're unclear about certain things. So just make sure that everyone is on the same page about what your expectations are as a faculty member. So this is my first tip for you. Make sure you are tracking your workload. You'll all be starting really for real in about 2 weeks, and going and working on. You've probably already started in terms of course prep, in terms of trying to figure out what your research pipeline is going to look like. Many of you in your first years, your research focus is going to be on converting dissertation chapters into articles, or possibly converting the dissertation as a whole into a book. So, that's usually your first priority as a researcher, but you also want to think about, what your next research questions are. If you're in a permanent position or somewhere that you think you might stay for a while, e.g., not a postdoc, you know, then you may want to think about like, what is the geographical context that I'm going to be researching in? What sort of questions should I be asking in my research that are pertinent to my new home? You want to be looking at making sure, this is one reason that people get hired and stay hired and stay employed is by producing research that is really relevant to their home area and to their institution's area. So when you're looking at your research questions, that's the sort of thing you want to identify. And the first things that you need to look at are, what are my tenure expectations? Now, the tenure expectations, almost overwhelmingly, people look at what your research requirements are. How many articles do I need in order to get tenure? How many of them need to be peer reviewed? How many of them need to be sole authored? Some schools have a sole author requirement, some don't. I personally do not support. I don't like having a sole author requirement. I think co-authoring is wonderful and lovely, and we should encourage it, and we should encourage collaboration. But you want to make sure that you understand whether or not that you have a plan to achieve those tenure goals in terms of your research. So what are my tenure expectations? How am I going to get there? Establish a research pipeline. What are my teaching requirements? In your first year, sometimes you'll get a course release. So you want to understand, and tracking your workload during your first semester is really important because it gives you a good idea as to how you're going to be able to succeed in the future when you lose that course release that you may have. So you want to make sure when you do this, you start tracking your workload. Now you can use just an Excel sheet. There are also apps like Clockify is another example, and I've got that on the next page. In terms of being able to track your workload, how much time am I spending on course prep? How much time am I spending on teaching? How much time am I spending on service? What even is service? So having some sort of system where you're tracking your hours is really important because every year you meet with your chair or your supervisor and they say, how are you doing? Are you meeting expectations? What sort of things do you need? Resources do you need to achieve your goals? Are you struggling in any way? And if you show up with this Excel sheet and you say, hey, yeah, I've been tracking my workload. This is how many hours I'm working. This is how many hours I'm dedicating to teaching, research, and service. And you can say I'm doing. It's evidence showing I'm putting all of this time in. I'm putting all of this effort in. And this can become important because I'm going to talk to you about service for quite a bit in this webinar because service is a black hole of faculty time. All of your time can be taken up with service. Even though it's 15 or 20% of your workload, it seems like universities are expecting you to do a lot more, serving on lots of committees, doing lots of peer review work. doing community outreach and service. It's a real time suck. And so for me, the first step in making sure that you are working your workload, that you are working your contract, and doing what your expectations are, is tracking that time. My first semester, I really felt like I wasn't working that hard. I was like, oh, this is fine. I was on a 3-3 load. Um, I taught 5 unique preps in my first year, and I was like, this is totally fine. It was not totally fine at all, by the way, because I started tracking my workload, and I realized that I was working all the time. I was working on weekends. I was working 65 to 70 hours a week. And like the vast majority of that was on course preparation. Like I was spending an absurd amount of time making my PowerPoints pretty, right? This is back in the day when we called them PowerPoints and not slide decks, and we used these things, right? I am old. We've covered this. And it was a real shock to me because I was like, man, I am spending like 35 to 40 hours a week just on class prep, just on lecture preparation. Now, it's your first semester, you've got X number of classes. So, you're going to be spending more time in the early stages of your career preparing your lectures than you are in the later stages of your career. Because, once you kind of have your lectures done, you'll repeat courses. You don't have to recreate the wheel every single semester. You'll just be doing updates or switching around your syllabus. But in the first couple of semesters, it's an amazing amount of work, right? Designing your syllabus, coming up with your lecture material, giving the lectures, and all of that. And then all of a sudden, after a few weeks, you're like, oh no, I have to grade things. So then that comes in as well. And so it's really important to track your hours so that you know how much time you're spending on that. Because if your contract says, here, I'll move to the next page. If your contract says your expectations are 40% research, 40% teaching, and 20% service, or 50% teaching, 35-15, or whatever it is, it should say that in your contract, and you should have knowledge of that. So if you're tracking your workload, you want to make sure that the amount of time that you're spending each week, that it's going into the buckets, right? And so you have 40% in the teaching bucket, 40% in the research bucket, and 20% in the service bucket. Now, as I said, early on in your career, you're going to be putting more of that time in that teaching bucket, just out of necessity, because you are creating new material for yourself and your students. And so that is going to take up more of your time. And like, I don't want anybody to freak out about that. Yes, your research is going to take a back seat in your first couple of semesters, and like that's okay. But as you move forward in your career, you want to make sure that you're trying to get those percentages and those ratios close to what your contract expectations are. This also, by using this spreadsheet or this app called Clockify, if your chair, say, wants to assign you another committee, or says, hey, why don't you run for faculty senate, as mine did, which was crazy as a first time assistant professor, but hey, it was fun. So if they say, hey, we'd like you to do more of this or more of that, you can pull out your spreadsheet, and say, look, I really can't do that. Like I've already filled up my service bucket. It's already overflowing, so I really can't take on more of this. And so by clocking your research, and by clocking your hours and tracking your time, you have this evidence to say, listen, I am doing my job. I am doing my expectations. Right now, I'm putting, I'm already exceeding expectations in these different areas. And so therefore, no, I cannot take on this new activity. I think this leads to what I think is the most difficult thing as a new faculty member, and that is saying no. It is incredibly difficult to say no. And I, in particular, was incredibly bad at it. I said yes to everything. I wanted to be a good university citizen. I wanted my department chair to like me. I wanted my dean to like me. I wanted everybody to like me. I wanted them to think that I was a hard worker. And as a result, I ended up in therapy and on psychotropic drugs. I was first diagnosed with anxiety in my second semester. And it was really just stress. It was stress and overwhelm, because I was not managing my time, right? I was working 70 hours a week and it felt like it wasn't enough. I always felt like I was behind the eight ball, that I didn't have enough time. And it was because I was not doing a good job advocating for myself. And so it's incredibly important when you start these jobs to be, yes, to be a good, citizen, to be a good colleague. But it's also important that you're not taken advantage of. And this is something that I think all of us who have advanced in our careers a little bit, it resonates. So these are things that, I'm hoping that these tools and making sure that you track your time will give you the confidence to be able to push back when necessary. Now, yeah, I'm going to pause here for a second. Um, I'm having trouble. I can't really follow the chat and questions. So are there questions here that you're talking?
Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
it was just like in that slide that it shows like research, teaching, service. There was a question about whether or not those like are hours, right? And those are hours. And
No, this is
then
percentages, percentage of time.
no, the one before.
Ah, yes, those are hours. So this was just an example. Yeah.
Right. And then in the, I guess that the other question, it was from Molly. Like, can you clarify the difference between the number of teaching hours? So this is the actual time you're
Yeah.
spending teaching, preparing for class, grading, and instructional hour equivalents, which might be detailed in your contract. I think that the answer is that they're the same. Like, it should be
Yep.
that you're spending only that.
Right. It's like all
Yeah.
of that goes in the teaching bucket, right? And so
Right.
and there's things that are unclear or ambiguous, and this can be really frustrating, right? So like one thing that was really ambiguous at Cleveland State was thesis supervision. People were like, "Well, is it teaching? Is it service?" If you're co-publishing with your doctoral student, is it research? And the answer is like, yes, it's all three. But like sometimes you want to clarify with somebody like, hey, listen, if I am spending time supervising a doctoral or a master's student or an undergraduate thesis, how does that get counted in my workload? Right. And like different departments are going to have different answers for you. So when there's things that are not clearly going in, when you're like, I don't know what bucket this goes in, it could be any one of the three buckets. This is when you talk to your chair and you say, like, am I getting teaching credit for this? Do I get, and there's so many ways that departments do this, and it is so confusing. There's like credits and credit banking. And so like we had this thing at Cleveland State where if you had a doctoral student that you were their advisor, their primary advisor, you would get something like two or three teaching credits, right? And now like that would be like a course offload, right? So you would get two, say, for a doctoral student, but you wouldn't get anything until they actually graduated. So in some cases, like, so we ended up rewriting some of these rules because we were like, listen, where sometimes people drop out, sometimes people, so it's like you could spend years advising a student and get zero credit for it. And so we said, like, let's figure out kind of a point system where you're getting some kind of partial credit, a quarter credit or something, per student, and like how is it measured and what bucket does it go in? I mean, you could get so in the weeds with this sort of thing. And the other thing is, and I'm not speaking badly about administration, although I am, is like their job is to get as much time out of you as possible. So like they're not, they don't, they, what they really want is you teaching in a lot of cases. Like they want you in the
Hmm.
classroom doing as much teaching as possible. So they don't necessarily want to give you teaching credit for some of these things, because then that means that eventually you'll have enough credits to be able to buy out a course and get a course offload. Course offloads are like gold, you guys. Hoard them, keep them, get as many as you can. Um, and so this ambiguity can be really problematic, especially for new faculty who are trying to understand, like, well, because you're literally saying, like,
Hmm.
what is my job? Like, what is my job? Like, which part of my job does this count toward? Like, um, because otherwise you're going to be doing work that you're not getting credit for. And you want to make sure that you're getting credit for the work that you're doing. And so by tracking these things and making sure that you're getting clarity when things are ambiguous, that's a really important part of
Hmm.
of your first in your first year of being like, okay, how much time am I spending on this? And in your first year, there's no answer, right? Like you have to figure out yourself how much time
Hmm.
you're going to put in to prepping your classes, how much feedback you're going to give your students on their papers, right?
Yeah.
I have one colleague. She's one of my best friends, and she is incredible. She gives the most unbelievable, detailed feedback. Spends
Mm.
absolute hours and hours and hours providing incredible feedback to her students, and a lot of us are just like, we think that's great, but we're
Hmm.
like, I'm not doing that, like,
Yeah.
half the time the students aren't even reading it, like they don't, they're just like, oh, I gotta be, okay, cool. That never happens. They always want higher grades. But so the question is like, how about, like, you only have a certain amount of time in a week. You really have to think about how you want to spend it, right? Because when it comes right down to it, your department wants you teaching as much as possible, but you know that you need to do your research in order to get tenure. So you've got to really fight to carve out that time to get your research done. And teaching and service will compete for that time relentlessly. And so
Hmm.
really important to sort of identify, to say no, like, I'm only allowing myself X number of hours to prep my lecture. And if I don't have the right images, and if I if it's not perfect, I'm just going to deal with it, and I'm going to cut myself off. Or I'm going to say, if my chair wants me to do this other committee or take on some other service work, I'm going to say no, because I can't do it, because I'm already doing this, and here is my evidence, my bucket is full. And so these are
Yeah.
really important things. Yeah.
I think that one question, maybe this one is more like from Conte, is about, okay, any strategies to say no?
Huh. Well, see, this is why I'm a coach, and I'm offering it, and I have a group coaching program for next year, because it's literally because I mean, no is a no. I'm already exceeding the number of hours of service, and it's incredibly difficult. It's incredibly. I mean, I'm terrible at it myself. Like I have to, and I feel guilty when I say no.
Hmm.
So guilty. But and this is why you have the tracking. You say, look, no,
Yeah.
I'm already doing, I'm already spending, what's 20% of 40 hours. I'm spending 10 hours a week on service, which is exceeding the 20% that is in my contract. Therefore, no, I cannot take on another service expectation. The more evidence you have to back up your no, the easier it is to say no.
Yes, yes. And there was like one more question, which is like, this is from Austin. I think that which is like in terms of helping us advocate for ourselves. Are other junior or pre-tenure folks in the department a good resource to
Yes.
use before we go to the chair and dean?
Yes and no. So it can be tough, right? Because um, in a lot of cases, your fellow junior faculty, like in both of my institutions, I became super good friends with several of my fellow junior faculty. We would socialize, and venting parties, very similar to what I had experienced in my doctoral program, which was like a really cool cohort, where we could, we were all sort of like, the Three Musketeers, kind of like, us against the world sort of thing. It's difficult to navigate as a new faculty member because you really don't know who you can trust. And sometimes your peers, I mean, they're not bad people, but they're also advocating for themselves, right? So if you're like, oh, I'm gonna help me say no to the chair, because they want me to be on this like faculty affairs committee, and because they know that if they encourage you to say no, then they might have to do it, right? Like they're going to be the next ones up. So there's also like a competition amongst the faculty members because
Yeah.
it is a zero sum game, in some cases, the department has to staff, ultimately all these different committees, because we still pretend that faculty governance matters at universities. Um, all evidence to the contrary. Um, so they're like, well, we need an untenured faculty member for this committee, or we'll get in trouble with the provost or whatever. We need representation on this committee. If you say no, then one of your friends is going to have to do it, and you kind of know that, and so it's like yes, your junior faculty are your commiserators, your peers, your colleagues, your cohort, your buddies, but then they're also sort of like the people that will have to do the work that you say no to, and vice versa. So it can
Yeah.
be challenging to do that. And when it comes right down to it, for me, it's, you just need to go straight to deal just with your chair and be like, I'm not going to worry about other people. If other people can't say no, that's a them problem. But I'm going to say no myself. Now, there's been several times, and at CSU, we had this big. I started in 2014, and then we hired like four faculty members, which was huge. A huge jump. In 2016. So we had all these new faculty members, and it was really great because everybody had a lot of energy, and we actually made a lot of changes to some of these workload requirements and some of these expectations. We created like a point system for service. So basically, like, so that everybody was the service was distributed across all of the faculty members, and it was really transparent, so like everybody knew what other people were doing, because before that we had a bunch of full professors who really were not doing much in terms of committee work or service. And now, as I got older, I was like, well, I know why, because they're tired, they're exhausted, they don't have the energy that we have. So we did make some, we had some energy and we made some changes, and and as junior faculty, we all collaborated together in that way. So, to answer your question, Austin, like, yeah, that can happen, but like also at the end of the day, you just need to advocate for yourself, and you need to not feel guilty and not worry about the fact that your chair is absolutely going to go to your bestie next and be like, all right, well, I'm asking them to do it next. Like, you have to not worry about that. You've just got to separate it, and do what's best for you.
So I think that those are all the questions.
Okay.
I mean, people put other things here as well, but they're mostly like comments. We can go back to them again, but I see your slide of using your resources, which seems a great conversation.
Yeah. Well, and like this is a good place to answer these questions about workload, because this is transitioning to sort of a new topic, which is, and this is something that, I've always been this person, you guys, like I'm like a nightmare, but also like a benefit in some ways. So like I was the one that, like, when my PhD program didn't have a PhD guidebook, I kept going to the PhD program director and being like, what is this? How many courses in should we be expected to like identify our dissertation question? And at what point do we get an advisor? And at what point do we do this? And at what point do I schedule my comps? And like all these questions, and because there was no guidebook and there was nothing, and so I wrote one, right? That's me. I like, this is don't be this, don't do this. Because it's like, oh, why did you burn out? I don't know, because maybe I'm writing guidebooks, instead of doing my research. So um, and with a new faculty position, there's also no guidebook. There's nobody is telling you here's all the resources that you have available to you. So when I went and started a new role, and I was actually in a good position because when I moved institutions, I had already had 5 years under my belt as an untenured faculty member at a different institution. So when I moved to Cleveland State, I knew what questions to ask when I started that job. And I was like, okay, what are my startup funds? How much money do I have? Do I get them do I get professional development funds every year? Do I get travel funds every year? Do I have to apply for them or is it automatic? What is the timeline? When are these application deadlines? How far in advance do we have them? Um, do I automatically get a graduate assistant? At CSU, every untenured faculty member got a graduate assistant. But once you were tenured, you no longer automatically got a graduate assistant. You had to either apply for them or pay for them through grants. And
Hmm.
so this is something to know. And so I'll start with startup funds. Now, not everybody has startup funds. So don't, if you didn't get a professional, we're in the social sciences, we're not like building a lab. So it's not like we're walking in here and getting, $150,000 in startup funds. We might get a few $1,000s. At my first job, had no idea what to use my startup funds for, and so I think I bought a laptop because I had a desktop in my office. So I got a laptop and I bought a ton of books because I wanted to have my fancy office, right, with my books and my bookshelves. And so I bought like tons and tons of books. I would go to conferences and I would go to used bookstores and I was filling up my book. That's what I used my startup funds for, which was incredibly stupid. I'm kind of a book nerd, so I'm not crazy regretful about it, but there were better ways for me to use my funds. And some of those ways are if it is to when you think about what your research pipeline looks like, what your research plans are, is there data that you may need to purchase? Do you need access to maybe different organizations? You can use those professional development funds to pay for like your ACSP membership dues or for your Urban Affairs Association membership dues or whatever, or your geography or sociology or poli sci. You can pay your dues through that and then therefore get access to the membership resources that you have with those organizations. You can purchase software. I was shocked in some places that we didn't have access to like the Adobe suite as faculty members. And so people were using their professional development funds for that. You can also use them for sometimes travel or sometimes not. But when you're coming in, and if you are lucky enough to be in a position that you have some startup funds, um, talk to your whoever the person is that controls that, whether it's sometimes it's the dean, sometimes it's the chair, um, to look at like is there a deadline for me to use these? Sometimes they say you have to use them in your first year. If they say that, see if there's any negotiation or wiggle room in that, because like for me it was like I had no idea what I wanted to do with that money. And it wasn't until like my second year that I finally had wrapped my head around kind of, oh, I've got these research questions that I want to pursue, and oh, I've got this grant, and like it would have been great for me to have some startup funds to do like a pilot study to be able to apply for a grant that I was interested in. But I had already spent it on used books to line up my office shelves, so it wasn't there anymore. Um, but also I had to spend it all in the first year. So if you can talk to your deans and chairs about saying like, could I have this over 3 years? That sort of thing. The same thing with graduate assistants. Um, and I'm happy to answer questions about this because most of us have been graduate assistants. So and sometimes those experiences are good and sometimes those experiences are not good. So when you enter a graduate program, you want to be a super great supervisor. You're like, for me, I had a graduate assistant and it was like a 20-hour a week. And I was like, well, now I was teaching three courses. So really what I should have done was just have my graduate assistant do the grading, do all of the grading. Instead, I was like, oh, that sucks. That sucks for them. Like, so I don't want to make them do that. I want them to be able to get something out of the assistantship. And so instead, I want to work with them on a research project. So, okay, so now I'm doing my own grading and, supervising a graduate student is not a net zero thing. It takes a lot of time. It's if you're doing it well and you're doing it right, it's actually not decreasing it's not helping you, it's not alleviating, it's not taking the burden off of your current work. It's actually adding more to it. And so if you have a graduate assistant, you really want to think about, again, you've got to be selfish here, not how do I best mentor this graduate student, but like how do I get what I need out of them? How do I use my graduate assistant to carve out more time for me to do my research? So these are things that you need to think about, in terms of and I hate to say it, but like you can be a good mentor and a strong mentor after the first 3 years. The first 3 years like is just trying to survive. It's just you're treading water. Don't feel like you have to be great at everything. You can use the resources that are provided to you to benefit you. That's what they are there for. You can start doing research with grad students and bringing them into your projects after the first couple of years. The first couple of years, use that support to support you in whatever way you think is best. Um, excuse me. Oh, guys, summer colds are the worst. Um, so that is something I want to emphasize. Um, yeah, so these when you're talking about how to use your startup funds, to purchase software or that sort of stuff, yeah, sometimes you've got to go through the institution. The institution will have rules. Um, um, I remember one thing we wanted access. Another great thing to do with your professional development resources is, sometimes the Michigan ICPSR, program that does like stats classes and different methods, intensive methods courses. Sometimes those things can be really great for you to do, and you can use your professional development resources for those kinds of things as well. Um, but yeah, you've sometimes got to work with your institution in terms of how to figure out how to get software if you need it. And sometimes you can also, but the other thing is startup funds, like those are finite and those are for you. And usually your startup funds or your annual professional development funds, whatever those are usually the funds that have the least restrictions on them. You can usually use them to do almost anything in terms of your professional life and how you're doing it. So you want to really protect those funds and you want to pursue other mechanisms to get things you need. So if you need software, don't say, I'm going to use my startup funds first. The first thing you do is you go to your chair and your dean and you say, I need access to this software. How do I get it? Do I work with the library to do this? Do other departments have access to the software? And could we piggyback with them? Could we partner with them? And this is where you have your sometimes your other assistant professors or your other professor colleagues might say, yeah, I need that too. Let's, so like GIS was a fight every time, because, we were sort of the only department at the entire university that used GIS. And so it was a fight. Like every time we had to renew our contract, we really had to demonstrate that we needed it. Both in the classroom and in our own research, for example. So you want to like make sure that you are kind of using every alternative mechanism to obtain these things that you need before you use your own professional development funds. So you want to protect those as much as possible. Um, And another, so when I first started, I didn't even realize that there were really internal grants until like my second or third year. I was like, oh, wait, there's funding that we can apply for every year to get like summer salary or travel funding or equipment. That laptop that I bought my first year, well, 5 years later, I needed a new one, and I was able to get an internal grant to purchase that. I didn't need to pay for it myself or didn't need to pay for it out of my professional development funds. I was able to apply for an internal grant. So these are things that you want to make sure you're identifying when you start a new position is the Office of Research at the university. There's also sometimes so there's university funds, there's college funds sometimes, and then there's sometimes department funds. And so there's like multiple little pots of money kind of all over the university that sometimes you can access. So figuring out where those are and what the application entails and how you can get access to those is a really important thing to do as a junior faculty member, because it can get you access to resources that you don't necessarily have. I know that at both of the institutions I was at, both of which were public institutions, um, our travel funds were really restricted. I wanted to go to two conferences a year, and we only had like $1,200, and that was like the entirety of our travel funds, so it wasn't sufficient. And so you had to go figure out, well, where are other places that I can get access to funding to supplement these guaranteed travel funds I have each year. So these internal grants are ways that you can sometimes access these things. Um, yeah, and Ivis is providing really great information in the chat here about how to use startup funds as well. Seriously, do not give in and buy the books. It's a terrible approach. So these are all really important as a new faculty member, that you want to really identify all of these areas, because the resources are incredibly limited. In today's political climate, if you're especially if you're in a certain color of state, your access to some of these funds and being able to travel freely and spend freely is severely constrained. So you want to do your best to use what resources you have in the best ways you can. Okay, so this is another good place to start. Are there questions about more questions about the resources and this sort of area of the job? Does anybody need any clarification? Oh, Austin's question here about graduate assistants. Um, yeah, okay, first I'm gonna speak to yeah, so the mentoring issue that Gala pointed out here. So sometimes I never got assigned a mentor as a faculty member. Nobody mentored me. We didn't have, and in both of my institutions, there was no formal or informal mentoring. Well, there was some informal mentoring, but there was no formal mentoring. You didn't get assigned a faculty mentor, and like I am torn about mentoring faculty internally, because if you're getting assigned a mentor, it can be incredibly awkward if you do not get along. Like if you just don't vibe, with your mentor or your mentee. Um, in a lot of cases, senior faculty are already like pressed. They're tired, they're exhausted, they're struggling to do their own work. They're getting more and more service expectations piled on them, and mentoring is usually the first thing that falls off the table. And this is true about PhD students as well. Like some of you may have experienced this, where like your mentors are great people, but like they just simply do not have the time to get back to you with comments on your drafts or anything else. You're waiting a long time. This is even more of an issue when you're talking about junior faculty members because they're seldom, again, they're not getting compensated for this mentorship. This is uncompensated time they're spending. If they're spending time mentoring you as a new faculty member, that's something they're not doing, that is coming off of here. So, you know, it's great to have a mentor, but like, I haven't seen a lot of examples, and this, I don't have, I don't have all the answers. I don't know about every program, but I haven't seen a lot of examples where institutions have, formal mentoring programs that really work well. Um, so I don't know. I think it's a great thing to do. And like for me, I use the ACSP mentoring program. I got assigned Kirk McClure. If you guys don't know Kirk, he's awesome. He was at Kansas for like his entire career. He's got this fantastic mustache. Um, Absolutely great guy. He's just a housing guru, and he, and he, I was paired with him through the ACSP mentoring program. So for me, I actually really like the association mentoring idea more than the internal mentoring idea because, like, it can be really weird if the personalities are bad, and it can end up being awkward and even damaging if you end up not being paired with a good mentor within your department. Whereas at the association, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't really matter. They're at a different institution. Nobody's getting, salty about it. It's fine, but like internally, people can, the junior faculty can feel frustrated because they're not getting mentorship. The senior faculty can feel frustrated because they're being expected to do uncompensated labor. It can be really weird. So like it's tough. And so I really like using the professional associations for those mentoring relationships. And so and relationship building for me is one of the most important elements of succeeding as a new faculty member. It's about not only figuring out what the balance is between being colleagues and friends in your new institution, how close do you want to get with people that you're working with? It can be really challenging and difficult. I mean, 90% of my relationships with my colleagues have been really positive. But I've had a couple of like really ugly incidents, where it's like we're not talking anymore, like the ombudsman is involved, sort of situations. Oh, the ombudsman. The ombudsman is an important person for you to know. If you're ever in a conflict with a fellow faculty member, not a student, um, with a fellow faculty member, or like with your chair, like if your chair keeps asking you to do things and you say no, and it's like it's not good, an ombudsman is basically a university mediator, and their job is to be neutral and unbiased. They're usually a senior faculty member who is doing this as part of their job. It's like, and they're not, unlike HR or something, like you don't want to escalate things to HR if it's just like a personality conflict. So an ombudsman is a person that can help you navigate these things. If you ever run into just like a sticky, crappy situation with a fellow faculty member. Student issues get resolved through the normal process of like, chair, it goes to the chair, and there's like student issue processes that are fully clarified. Um, but when you have like interpersonal issues with faculty, the ombudsman is somebody that you should be aware that they exist, and you most likely will never ever ever have to engage with them at all, but you should be aware that they exist. Um, yeah, it was Dr. Kirk McClure. Yeah, he's the absolute best. He's one of my favorite human beings of all time. And I actually have if you were in his department, then I have the House That Kirk Built T-shirt. And I wear it all the time. It's like my favorite T-shirt. So yeah. So other questions about informal mentors. Yeah. this point about workshops and seminars. This is another really, and I didn't put this on here. It should be on the PowerPoint. Is the Centers for Teaching and Learning. There's usually a Center for Teaching and Learning or something close to that name. Usually, it's housed within the education department in a university, and they offer lots of great resources on how to build a syllabus from scratch, how to use different, how to create a flipped classroom, if you want to use different teaching styles, if you want to switch something up and try something really new, they'll have workshops on how to do that and examples of how to do that. If you're running into issues, which is constant, of like, my students aren't engaged, my students aren't participating, what do I do? There's lots of resources available at universities, Center for Teaching and Learning, that then can help you with that. And honestly, those I went to a bunch. No, it wasn't taught about. Who's taught about pedagogy in their PhD program? No, none of us are taught to teach. It's just you pick it up from osmosis, apparently. But this is why the centers of teaching and learning are so important, because like they are actual education experts. They're the pedagogical experts. They understand pedagogy. And so that was when I was first at App State. I went to several like multi-day workshops on pedagogy. I went to one on designing rubrics, and it was like one of the best things I ever went to. It was just like literally a full day to like design rubrics, and like I had gone through, I was a survey design person. Like I did a survey as my dissertation, and I took lots of coursework in survey design. So I thought I could design a rubric, no problem. I didn't think I needed instruction in that, and I was completely wrong. Went to this full day workshop and learned to design a rubric, and it was really great. So the Centers for Teaching and Learning are incredible resources. Also incredible resources that everybody forgets about are your happy university librarians. These people, librarians are so great because like everybody forgets about the librarian. It's like if you need to figure out, oh, I want access to some resource that we don't have in the library, or I need data, or I need archives, or I want to send my student, my students need help doing finding research resources. Like your librarians, every time I've contacted my university librarian, they have been beyond excited to help me with whatever I need. Like I remember contacting them because there were a bunch of documentaries that I wanted to use in my classes, my undergrad classes. Like there was, there were, and we didn't have access to them. And I contacted my librarian, and not only did they order the ones I wanted, they gave me information about all these other ones that might be good. And like people forget about librarians so much that they are incredibly excited when somebody actually remembers that they exist and wants to use them. They're some of the most helpful people I've ever encountered at universities throughout my entire career. Yeah, to Canvas resources. And not only are these, I would encourage everybody, even though like your time is precious, and I know how hard it is to say, oh, I'm going to give up a half a day to go to some workshop. I really encourage you to do it, especially in your first couple of semesters, because for me, I met a bunch of people, right? Like because I went there, and it was a great way for me to meet other assistant professors in from other departments, and other lecturers from other departments. Like I had already met my immediate professional colleagues in my department, but like it's really hard to get to know people because the universities are so siloed, and maybe there's like one whole university faculty meeting every year, so like how do you get to know people that aren't in your department? And going to these workshops is a really great way to do it, because the other people there are also usually newbies that are trying to learn how to use Canvas to the best of their abilities, or how to learn about research databases. So going to these workshops is also a great way to meet people and to make friends, which is, again, I think something that we don't talk about enough, is how isolating these first years can be. And for those of you, because I know a few of you are starting their second year right now, and so it would be if this resonates with you, I'd like to hear about it. it's so hard that first year because you're so focused on your work, and it can be really isolating, and you've kind of like left behind this whole community that you had as in your graduate work. And so that's one thing that can help, is attending some of these workshops can actually not just help in your developing your teaching skills and your research skills, but also meeting people that are also living in your community. All right. Did I miss anything? I have
Mm, no, yeah, I think that those were the questions. A lot of it are just comments, right?
right. Okay, great. Yeah, because I'm pretty much so yeah, this is the end of my formal presentation. I'm doing just a very quick sales pitch. So as I mentioned, I transitioned out of academia, and I am just starting a coaching business. And because I'm aware of these, like that mentoring isn't necessarily there, that the formal mentoring programs maybe don't work, and it's hard to get people to volunteer to be informal mentors and all of this stuff. So I decided to create this coaching program that's basically we meet twice a week. It's group coaching. And then you also can schedule individual meetings with me. You can use your professional development funds, your startup funds to pay for this. And we cover all sorts of things like we talked about today in a group setting that's filled, and that you can bring your own issues in. We can talk about different stuff. How do I create my research pipeline? How do I find collaborators to write with so I'm not 100% responsible for my entire research, um, production? How do I manage my teaching load? I'm struggling with my grading. How do I streamline that? What kind of are there tips there? I've got terrible students. How do I navigate these? What are ways for me to handle these things? And then there's always just like, with any job, but I feel like academia is very precious when it comes to this. University politics are crazy. And so sometimes it can just be like, you sort of go to a faculty senate meeting and you're like, who are these people? And are they completely insane? So if this is something that you're interested in, you can go to my website, which is compassroseediting.com. If you're on LinkedIn, you can follow me and there's information there as well. I don't want to spend too much time doing a sales pitch. You guys can know how to find me. Um,
I think
that
that oh yeah, you put it in their
Yeah,
chat. Okay.
yeah, that's why because I can't talk and type at the same time apparently. But yeah, and also, I mean, this is a group coaching program that's a full semester or a full year, however long you want to be there. But I also do individual coaching. If you're like, man, I just need somebody to help me through some of this stuff, drop me a line. We can work something out. Um, so yeah. So if anybody has other questions, are there if you've got questions that are like really kind of specific, go ahead. You can chat just to me if you want sort of confidentiality and don't want your name broadcast on there. You can go ahead and do that. Um, but any other questions or comments? If what I've said today resonates with you, and you want to share an anecdote about how you saw this happen in your first year, let us know. I'd love to hear.
Yeah, we have like still like 20 minutes.
Yep.
So take advantage. Ask your questions.
Yeah, guys, if you contact me later, you're going to have to pay for my time. So do it
Yeah.
now. Excuse me. Oh gosh, there's a Q&A.
Yeah. So there's one question here about like what suggestions do you have for current postdocs?
Yeah, so postdocs are tough. You know, my recommendations for postdocs are really just to do your best to carve out time to be working on your own material, right? Because in a lot of cases as a postdoc, right, you're working on somebody else's research. And it's great, right? Because like you're getting pubs out of it, you're getting research experience, you're getting, all this great stuff. But if you want to move into a faculty position out of the postdoc, then you've got to be then it's important to try to get like that journal article out of your dissertation, to make sure you're attending conferences and you're doing the networking. And so those are really my and to make sure that you're if there are skills that you're developing, that you're really able to get those things that you can put on your CV formally, for postdocs. I never did a postdoc, so I can't really speak from experience, but yeah. So I got a text that said, that they put a question in the Q&A, and I have absolutely zero idea
Uh,
where the
oh,
Q&A exists in
I
the
see that
Zoom.
there's a Q&A. Sorry. It's just like I'm not
Oh, there it
accustomed
is.
to the Q&A either. Can you see it?
Yes, but I do not
And
see any questions here.
oh, it says what are the best resources for searching faculty positions? And then that's one question. And the other one is like any good resources. I guess it's similar, yeah.
Okay.
For searching tenure faculty jobs, it's kind of the same question.
Yeah,
Other than hinder, hinder or higher ed. That's what it is. Higher ed jobs.
yeah. So I always, for me, I think the your associations, ACSP,
Yeah.
90% of the jobs that I applied to, I found through either the
Hmm.
ACSP job site or the Urban Affairs Association job site. Some of you may be, and because planning is so interdisciplinary, you've got folks who may be going to like, political science conferences or be affiliated with public policy or sociology or AAG. So, depending on what your subfield in planning is, I was housing and community development. So, like, it was really public policy for me and a little bit of sociology, but like not really. Your transportation conferences. So, I think as a rule, your professional associations like ACSP are where you're going to find the jobs. I have found now, um, if you are looking for international, jobs, in those cases, sometimes the domestic, like ACSP, doesn't necessarily have a lot of international jobs. So you may want to go to, the World Planning Congress or the European Planning Association. And I have found that inside higher ed and higher ed jobs and the Chronicle of Higher Education, they're not great. I don't think that they're not great for the social sciences, and they're really not great for planning and public policy. So I have not found a lot of, success there. So I think your best bet is being, is checking these your ACSP and your UAA kind of job ads.
And I think that
And
Austin has
ASPA.
his hand up.
Yes, can you hear me? Sorry, I just
Yes.
moved literally like 2 days ago, so I'm still trying to figure out technology. So my question earlier was about like junior faculty and things like that. So I got my PhD from Cornell in planning, but I now find myself in a PA slash political science department.
Yeah. Same.
So I find myself that my three colleagues that are pre-tenure are in the political science realm, but not the PA realm. And I don't know if you could speak a little bit about, finding a department that's multifaceted. How do you interact with those kind of people? That's my question. Thank you so much. This was very informative.
Yeah. Oh, good. That's a great question. And so my first job, we were planning in geography. And like my closest friend in the geography department was a dendrochronologist. She was a tree ring. She did tree stuff, right? Like not even close to anything that I did, or that I do. So, so I get you. And when I moved to CSU, it was an urban affairs department, and where we had PA planning, public policy, and the fit just felt better. And it was like all of a sudden I had multiple colleagues that I could collaborate with, with research, and also just talk about stuff. Like me and my bestie at App State. She and I got along great, but like we didn't necessarily talk research because like we didn't understand each other's research at all. There were climate scientists in that department and all sorts of stuff. So I get you. And it can be kind of isolating when you're like, man, it would be really great if I had like some buds, in this department. And so, I mean, again, this is where your professional associations can be really helpful. And just making sure that you're going to your planning conference and sort of like just reconnecting with your people can just feel really good, especially when you're in a department like you describe, where like you're like, I am the only planner, and like everybody else is doing like, is democracy dying? How do we measure fascism? Which is very interesting and very important right now. But it can feel isolating. So, and the other thing is if you're in a city, you can also look to other universities that are in the city. This was not an option for me when I was in Boone, North Carolina. I was kind of stuck with my App State people. But in Cleveland, there's multiple universities here. If you're in a larger city, you can reach out to friends or other folks who are in your general area. But I can't really give you any tips, so much as I can give you some commiseration. It can be really tough in those first years, but you can still be friends with the people outside your discipline, but you just have to find creative ways to maintain connectivity with your discipline. One thing that really has helped with for me has been um, was to like put together virtual writing times, right? So like from we did Fridays from like 10 to noon. A bunch of my kind of ACSP friends and I would just do a Zoom writing meeting, and we didn't even talk. We were just all, it was just, we were all sitting there together online. And I think this started during the pandemic. I think during the pandemic, we identified some of these creative ways to maintain community, and when we weren't able to be physically together. So I would encourage you to see if you can maintain that connectivity, in other ways with folks outside of your immediate department. Oh gosh, really great question in the Q&A about talking about culture differences, and the U.S. being a place where self-promotion is not just expected, it's expected, it's valued, which can be very challenging for folks coming from different countries and different cultures, where promoting yourself is seen as arrogant and something not to do. It can be really challenging to do that, and I've never had a problem with this with self promotion. and I'm and but I would recommend you find somebody like me, right? Make friends with somebody like me who will be your champion. Find you a obnoxious, loud American champion who will go to the conferences and be like, "Hey, have you met my friend? She's doing incredible work." And she won't say anything about it because, she's shy, but let me tell you about this cool stuff that she's got. So like that, and like I'm not saying that like this is a good thing or a bad thing, right? I'm not making a value judgment on whether cultural differences are better or worse than others. But if you're going to be in the US where you're expected to like go to conferences and promote yourself, or be able to go and when doing the job talk is incredibly terrifying, especially for folks who are not extroverts or are coming from different cultures like that. I think
Mm-hmm.
finding somebody else to promote you can be really, really helpful. Um, yeah, another question about interdisciplinary areas. Yeah, so the question is, any suggestions for, I don't know if everybody can see the Q&As, I have no idea. Any suggestion for people
I
with
don't know. I don't think so.
okay. Um, People who are in interdisciplinary areas that are not fully defined within the boundaries of planning, what are the best strategies in the first year? For instance, networking across departments or building better connection to the discipline department they are currently located in. Yeah, and Ivis, you've answered this saying, that try to network in your department first. And or other departments that are tangential to your discipline. And yeah, there's really no right answer here. You know, for me, um, it's about it was about I actually had, because in my first few years I was in this department of geography, there were not any people who were clear collaborators for me. Like there were not easily identified clear collaborators. And so I ended up collaborating with folks that I knew from conferences. For me, and again, being in a rural, isolated part of the country, the conference became an incredibly vital place for me to get my work out, to network, to identify collaborators, etc. And so, I would cold email people that I met at conferences and say, "Hey, I've been thinking about doing this research project. Would you be interested in coming on, with me about this?" So, in terms of research collaboration, I would not feel at all constrained by the limits of your department or your particular institution. That is why you're here. That's why you're at ACSP. That's why you're a part of this organization. Use that to find your people. Network with your friends from your old PhD cohort, as well. I ended up collaborating with folks from my PhD cohort, folks I met at the conference. And it wasn't until I moved to Cleveland State that I really found people in my own department to collaborate with. And then all of a sudden it was like I was awash in like people that were interested in the same things that I was interested in. And we did a bunch of really cool stuff. But that is not available to everyone. Yeah, so your work week is if you're there was a question about how many hours a week do we typically work? In the United States, for it's usually defined as a 40-hour work week. As I said, my first semester, I thought I was working like 35 hours. Like when I like sat and thought, I was like, yeah, I'm working 35 hours a week. And then when I actually tracked everything, I was working 65 or 70 hours a week. Um, so that was something that I didn't even have my own awareness about how much I was working. So the goal is 40 hours, right? Or less. But your first year, you're probably going to be working more than that. And for me, it's really a matter of limiting how much you're putting into your teaching and limiting how much you're putting into your service. Because when it comes right down to it, if you're in a tenure track position, your research is what matters. And if you don't have the minimum research expectations, you may get denied tenure. If you're a mediocre teacher, you will not. That is probably not going to affect your tenure decision. Your research affects your tenure decision. So, as a junior faculty member on the tenure track, now again, this is on the tenure track. I know a lot of you are in maybe assistant teaching positions or in lecturer positions. This is a different it's a different allocation of resources. But if you're on the tenure track, you really have to make sure that you are protecting your research time. So it's really about identifying and then limiting yourself on how much time am I spending on my teaching and service. Oh, hello! Congratulations on joining CSU. That's really you're on a road trip to Cleveland right now. That's fantastic. Yeah. Listen, Cleveland gets a really bad rap, my friend. But it is a fantastic city, and I think you'll really, really like it here. And yeah, I'd be happy. Please do drop me a line. I'd love to meet up and chat about CSU, and chat about Cleveland when you get up here. Welcome. All right. I think that might be Ivis. Am I missing anything?
Mm, I mean, there's like a few more, I guess, in the chat. Uh, but I think that you were talking about, you did answer the one about like how to solicit collaboration.
Hmm. There's no real good answer, to that, besides doing these sorts of things. These webinars, and Ivis is killing it. Okay, Ivis has a job, right? That isn't designing ACSP's mentoring webinars. Okay, but she's putting
Mhm.
together some really incredible webinars and programs. So make sure you're looking at that, and identifying those things, because these are really invaluable, for you, to look at this. And in terms of like, how do I find research collaborators? You conference, and there's a skill to conferencing. You go to the conference, you get the program, and you spend the few days before the conference going through and identifying panels and
Mhm.
papers and people that you think would be people that you might be interested in working with, or that you think this presentation might be really useful for this project that I'm working on. And then you go and you talk to them. You go to the networking events, and it kind of sucks, that they're so expensive, right? Because in a lot of cases, the you know the events that are not panels, are extra on top of that. I think it's really worth it, to try to go to some of the networking events, especially those designed for early career scholars, because that's where you meet your people. And so the best way to find research collaborators is to be really present at the conference, and to really, and it's exhausting. I mean, even for me, like, I get to the conference, and like after the third day, I'm like, shoot me now. I'm just gonna hide in my hotel and not talk to anybody for at least a week. But you just kind of have to force yourself to get out there and, like, go into the lobby, into the bar afterwards, and talk to people and chat with people. That's how you find your people. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is to find your people, when you are in
Mhm.
this transition period of moving from PhD to professor. Having a really solid support system is what will get you through, um, and what will get you through feeling, not overwhelmed, but solid. Like, you want to be able to feel solid. And that is, and having those so you kind of have to like recreate your community and your support systems from
Mhm.
scratch. And these professional organizations, are some of the best ways to do it.
Excellent. We are out of time. I did want to say, like, if you have Rosie's website, there's also like a newsletter, right? And
Yes.
the newsletter has opportunities there's some advice, fellowships, and grants and things like that, right?
Yeah, and I don't know if this is okay, but Ivis, if you give me the registration list, I can send a follow-up email to everybody here, with information on how to sign up for my newsletter. It's called the Compass Rose Roundup, and it's
Mm-hmm.
resources for early faculty, grants, fellowships, all sorts of things like that. Um,
Yeah.
so if you're all right with that, Ivis, or I can
Mm-hmm.
write an email and send it to you, and you can distribute it to the registration list. Either way, yeah, I can provide that information to follow up, so that everybody here can contact me if you need to, or sign up for that newsletter. You can also find me on
Yeah.
on LinkedIn. Unfortunately, I'm on LinkedIn. you can find me there and follow me there and connect with me there as well. And I might be at the conference in Pittsburgh. So lots
Excellent.
of ways.
Very
Yeah.
good. Yeah, I see that there's actually like a lot of hunger for this. This was like I have been trying to do like mentorship that is like across like for everyone. This one is the only one that has been focused for new faculty. But again, like if you have any ideas of like things, I got a lot of ideas of potential talks here. Also, like in ACSP, we have like also some professional development sessions that people to put together. So you might check those out. Those are different than route tables and also the papers that people present. So just make sure that you're paying attention to what is in the program for Pittsburgh, but also connect with ACSP in LinkedIn, where we announce like these talks as well as like the newsletter. Check out those because that's where how we promote these kinds of webinars. Again, thanks so much, Rosie for the talk. And now Rosie and myself are going to stay here and chat. So I'm going to say goodbye to everyone else. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for
Thank you
coming
for
in.
having me, and thank you all for coming.